you are listening to the Kinetic Man Podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm David, and we want to walk with you on the journey to living a life defined by uncommon action that is full of purpose, adventure, and meaningful relationships. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours, and together achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to leave the potential life behind and become kinetic men.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Stu. Hey, have you ever had an idea for the Kinetic Man Podcast? We want to hear from you. We're always dreaming up ways to make this podcast more valuable for our listeners. So we want to hear what you've loved and what you want to hear more of so we can make future episodes even better. Go to thekineticman.com/survey to help us make the podcast even better. And listen, if you do this before the end of October, you will automatically be entered to win a $100 gift card. Take the survey today at thekineticman.com/survey and be entered to win. Thank you for being an amazing listener. See you.
What up, my dudes? This is a new experience for us. We are doing a round table. Actually, the table is square, so it's rectangle. I don't know my geometry, and there may be questions with this, but hey, I'm excited. We're currently in our retreat up in Empire, Colorado. We've got some awesome dudes here. We've got Michael Uperio, who has been a guest. We have Marcus Long, who's been a guest. We have Casey Kendall, who's been a guest. We have Brandon Jones, who's been a guest. We have Stephen Heptig, who is a multiple guest and a co-host. And he's the part of the triad in the Kinetic Man. And then we have Jay Robb, who has also been a guest. Unfortunately, we also have Stu with us today, who is somebody that cannot. He's been a guest. He's typically a guest on this podcast. And for some reason, we just have not found a way to replace him. But I'm really excited about today. We're in the second day of the retreat. Some amazing conversations have taken place. I think there's been some tremendous growth. I know for me, these retreats are always they're just an amazing, very selfishly, they're fun, and there's a lot of depth that we experience here. But I'm super excited about this something we're trying this time, and I think this will be a really good conversation.
Yeah, man. So Stephen and I were carpooling up. I picked Stephen up at the airport, and we were driving up to kind of get prepared for it. And I was just asking Stephen about how being a dad is going. He has a newborn at home, number 2. And there's some challenges with being a dad. And then we kind of started getting into just conversations about how when we grew up as kids, it was very different. It looked a whole lot different, felt a whole lot different, and we're just curious, what has changed. We've had a podcast with Lenore Skenazy on there, and she wrote a book called Free Range Kids, and just thinking about like how we as dads can make some impact and make some change, and just try to get back to where, and maybe we can't, maybe we don't parent the same way that our parents did, but it's a good conversation. Stephen, you want to take it and kind of just throw out the question to our group here on what our discussion was like in the truck coming up?
Yeah, I listened to the Free Range Kids episode. There's also the book, The Intentional Father by John Tyson, which kind of talks about the same stuff. And there's some programs out there that as your kids get a little bit older, you can work through kind of taking a boy to a man, or taking your daughter to a woman and sending them out into the world. And so I'm just curious, we have this amazing group of fathers here, and I wanted to ask the group, out of a purely selfish perspective, because I have a 3-year-old and a 6-week-old now, like, what are other men doing to really take action against the free range kids idea? And the example that Stu and I were talking about is, I live on a street that's not a cul-de-sac, and I want to be able to let my kid, as he gets older, ride his bike and ride it farther and farther, because I remember as a kid in our neighborhood, we used to ride out of our neighborhood across a major 4-lane road into a forest that had bike paths on it and a creek. And I just can't imagine that happening these days. That cannot be normal, whereas that was very normal in my childhood. And so I just wanted to ask the group of men here, what are some of the things that you have done, that you are currently doing, or you plan on doing to sort of raise your kids intentionally, give them some freedom of choice, some wandering space, and set them up to kind of take your sons to be, men of action and men of quality.
Casey, I know we've talked. So, Casey, you're my cousin, and you have two boys, and we've talked a lot about kind of some of the stuff that you're allowing your kiddos to have some free range and run around. Why don't you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so it started with me reading the Lenore Scorsese, Scorsese book, uh, and, and really getting some ideas coming out of that. Just looking at the way that our kids were playing, it was always in the house, and if friends came over, it was always in the house. We were never outside playing, and looking back at the youth that I had. So it started with baby steps for us, just okay, you can go two houses down. We know these, like we've met the parents, and you can freely come and go between our house and that house. And then next thing you know, we got neighbors that are a little bit further down the street. Okay. And you're opening up that window a little bit further. Okay. Now you're allowed, basically, we have a stop sign at one end of our street and a stop sign at the other end of our street. And we just made a simple rule that you can go anywhere in between these two stop signs as long as you have your bikes. You leave your bikes out front, so I know where you're at. When it's time to come home, I walk outside, I find your bikes, and that's where you're at. And then we've continued to evolve that and grow that. We have a creek that kind of runs through a green space that's, I don't know, it's maybe a quarter mile from our house. It's not very far. It's all through neighborhood, easy to get through. They don't have to cross any major streets to get there. But again, it was slowly, we would walk down there with them, and then we would leave them there and leave like a cell phone with them and say, okay, when the alarm goes off on the cell phone in 45 minutes, you guys have to walk home. And they did that successfully a couple times. We had some that were failures where then we would have to like reel it back in and like, okay, now you don't get to go house to house, and now you have to check in. So for us, it's been a growing process. And then we've evolved now to the point where they walk themselves to school and home from school by themselves. I got a 7-year and a 10-year-old, and there's not a lot of kids in our neighborhood. There's not a lot of kids in our school that are doing this, but we've grown this evolution and just giving them a little piece at a time and continuing to grow it. And we've had good success with that.
Yeah, so as like Casey kind of talked about, and I think our circumstances for my wife Amy and I, we've probably been fortunate in a lot of ways in some of the places that we've lived. A few years ago, we lived in a cul-de-sac in Colorado. We moved to England for 3 years, where I think the culture and the tendencies, people are out like walking. You see your neighbors and stuff a lot more in general than many places here in the U.S. And we moved back to the U.S. about a year ago, and again we're in a cul-de-sac in a suburb south of Kansas City. Which when we quickly moved back, the kids were at the house as we're pulling in the drive and stuff, which was exciting for us to see that other kids were out playing, and that's what we wanted for our children. And so certainly I don't look over those circumstances that we've been in, but also like talking about like what we are doing and how are we kind of comfortable with that and stuff as well. My wife and I love to invite people into our home, our neighbors, and build relationships as adults. And I think that's something also that we can do to become comfortable with, who lives next door or two houses or three houses down, right? So whether you have young children and you're kind of like prepping the space for future years, or you move somewhere new and you want to be comfortable with who lives on your street before your kids are roaming on bicycles, like you can take that action into your own hands, I think. And like, well, that's, maybe you move in and you go around the neighborhood and meet your neighbors, tell them who you are, where you came from, how long have they been in the neighborhood, invite them over for dinner, some of those things. And that, I think that will help like become more comfortable with when your kids are down the street, playing somewhere, who they are, kind of where they are. And, Casey kind of mentioned like giving them a little bit of space. And so when our kids kind of, well, if a neighbor kid comes over and asks like, hey, can they play? First of all, we let our children kind of make that decision. Of course, like if homework's done or we don't have somewhere to go or something, but if they're available, we let our children make that decision. Like, do you want to go play, or do you want to read, or whatever else is that you're doing? Give them a little bit of freedom. And if they don't want to, they can, tell that neighbor like, hey, maybe in like 30 minutes or an hour, I'll come out and play. But also when they do go down the street and stuff, we give them that time. Hey, you have 30 minutes or you need to be back at this time, and trying to create a little bit of responsibility there as well. And hey, Mason, sometimes they're 5, 6, 10 minutes late. And we just kind of remind them like, hey, you were supposed to be home at this time. You need to make sure you're kind of watching the clock, and, giving them a little bit of freedom, but letting them know when they're kind of, stretching that freedom a little bit, and that there could be consequences to that.
Yeah, I think as parents too, we have to really analyze why we parent the way we parent. And I think there's also an extension of that is what kind of adults are we trying to create? And we've talked about this in other podcasts before. But one of the things that that I have really, since we've started the Kinetic Man and gotten really intentional about this stuff, I started digging into the idea of, do I desire that my kids make good decisions and they are independent? Do I desire that we create an environment that starts to challenge them and stretch them? Or do I want to create kids who are completely reliant on their parents, live in a world of fear, and want to stay home forever? And I know that that's somewhat, I'm not trying to be pejorative or even extreme, but if you really take your parenting style and you project that forward, and you're not allowing your kids to experience things. And I'll tell you, there was a kid that we were hanging out with the other day that Noah's age, my youngest, 7 years old. And not too long ago, somebody tried to abduct him from his front yard. Like, that happened. And the kid yelled, and the dad came out, and it's trauma, right? And there's an impact. And so this kid doesn't trust males, and I had to work pretty hard to get him to come out of his shell. My wife coaches him in soccer, and he's super comfortable with her, and she's a whisperer to kids anyways. So there's a bond there. But my point is, there are real things that happen, and there are dangers, but is that statistically is that the norm? Is it not the norm? And if it's your kid, well, it doesn't really matter about statistics, right? But at the end of the day, like, how do you recover from something like that? And how do you also move forward as a parent? That dad's challenge is way different than mine with those considerations now, but still, like, I'm trying to create, what is the environment I'm trying to create, and how do we get past this culture of fear? And so one practical step, that I think is been in my household is I encourage my kids to talk to strangers. I say, hey, you should talk to strangers. Go talk to strangers. Most strangers are not bad people. I'm a stranger. For most people's kids, I am a stranger. I'm not a bad person. They should trust me, and I would help a kid. Well, most people are that way. And so that's a very practical way to say, and if they're in trouble and something's happening, then they can yell out to a stranger. They can go to a stranger. They can seek help elsewhere. It's not being completely reliant on a parent, right? And so but it's very challenging. It's a very challenging place to be. And then, we talked about this earlier, but there's two parents in this equation. You both have to be comfortable with that, or you at least have to critically think through and address that. And it's not an easy thing, right? It's not an easy thing.
That's interesting. I was thinking while you were talking about a parent-teacher conference that my wife and I had last year with my daughter's teacher, and from a school perspective, she's doing great. She's a great reader in math, and like everything is going good. And then she kind of stopped and she said, "Hey, one thing I'm noticing about your daughter is that she has a hard time when things change, when she was told to do something, and then I asked her to stop and go do something else, and like it kind of like derails her." And she basically told us, she's like, "You need to figure out how to allow your child to fail." And she almost like gave us a challenge to like almost set her up for failure. And like my wife and I came back and talked about that, and we were like, that's really hard. Like, that's really hard to almost like set an environment where your child is going to fail. And so like just some simple examples that we've tried to start doing is Typically we make their lunches and we set out their water bottles, and we remind them to that their homework is due on a Friday, and we get like everything set up for them to where like they aren't going to fail. But since that conversation, we are now really trying hard to like not make those reminders, to not give them a hint that their homework is due, to not remind them that their library book is due on a Wednesday, to not put the water bottle by their front doorstep, and to like allow them to leave the house and them forgetting their homework and not turning around and going to get it, and allowing them to like not bring their water bottle, and like simple stuff. But it's at 7 and 5, or 8 and 5, it's allowing them to like kind of get a little failure, right? And I'm seeing a big difference now, by them having some small failures, like to put some responsibility in their court, to learn those lessons, at a really early age. Jones, I'm curious, like as an educator, I want to hear your perspective on from you, as where you see this going, in your world.
Yeah, you guys have my wheels spinning here because I'm playing a parent role. I'm also playing an educator role. I'm also playing somebody who educates educators role. So there's so many things going on here. What I can say comfortably is that what we know for sure as parents is that our foundation of how to be parents is because of our experience of how we were parented, right? So like, no matter what happens, we will fall back to what was done to us from our own parents, whether it was right or wrong, does not matter, right? And then we're bombarded with news and social media and everything current day of how you now should parent, which might be very different than the way we were parented. And we can read these books and we can listen to these things and we can watch these news broadcasts. We can 100% agree. We'll be like, yes, that is right. We need to let our kids fail. We need to do all these amazing things that we hear are right for kids, until it happens to you and your kid. And then your immediate gut reaction is not to think about that thing I read that talked to me about the new age parent or whatever it is. Your gut reaction is you revert right back to how you were parented, and then you parent your children that exact same way. And I say that because the same thing happens in education, where teachers, there's a lot of new philosophies and new ways of approaching through restorative practices with kids, and all the teachers are like, yes, that's absolutely right, until a kid destroys your classroom or tells you to F off in front of 20 other kids. And then you revert right back to the way you were punished by teachers or schools, which is not the way they're telling you to do it now, right? So no matter what, there's hardwire things ingrained in us because of our experiences. Not saying whether those are right or wrong. All that to be said, that we can want the best for our children and we can create the best of environments and the best experiences for our kids. But when they go wrong, how we react is way more impactful than necessarily like what they're getting out of it. Because if we just revert back to things, or we turn on them, and all of a sudden we're hypocrites towards our children based on what their understanding is, then we've backpedaled. And so I say all that to say that, like, it's not a contest. And I think sometimes as parents, we take it on like a contest, that like, well, I know that kid down the street, his parents would do X, Y, and Z, so I'm not going to do that. Like, we have to know our children intimately. We have to know what their needs are, and we know how to best serve them more than anybody else. And when we drive everything through that, I think that's healthy. And at a school, trust me when I tell you, I've dealt with every parent across the spectrum, of helicopter parents to like parents who are, I don't see them the entire year until their kids walking across the stage in 8th grade. That's the first time I've met their parents, is on that day. None of that is necessarily the best, right or wrong. These parents are trying to figure out the best way to interact with their kids based on their situations. Also, I heard a lot too in here around, similar to my family, like, I can let my kids go outside and play. They can ride a bike around the neighborhood. They can go down to the creek. They can go to the pool. We are so blessed. We have a pond on our property. My kids can fish. Not everybody has that same situation. So being understanding of that a parent who might be growing up in a raising kids in an apartment with a handful of other people that are living there, multi-generational families in one place, might not have the opportunity to be like, I'm going to test it out and see what happens if my kids go this far or that far. Like, it's just different experiences and different understandings for folks. And so taking that into effect of like how, or not how, but why people might be making decisions they're making for their kids based on their situations can make a lot more sense to someone who, like, I would never make that decision for my kid. Oh, but I can understand why you might make that decision for your kid too. So taking the competition out of it, of who's right and who's wrong and who's better, who's not. It's so funny because this is so eerily similar to education. Like talking to a young teacher about how to run a classroom. It's very much like talking to a parent who's got a 2-year-old and they're questioning, like, am I doing this right? That's a really good question. And I'm not the one, the expert to tell you how to do that, right? But just interesting point of view. It's really nice to listen to everybody else's experience as a father too. And I would never claim that I'm doing anything right by my kids. I'm trying, but I don't know if it's right or not, and I won't know that until they're, a husband or wife, father, mother of their own kids.
I think it's really interesting that a lot of these topics and concepts that we talk about are so interrelated. So, Marcus, you mentioned building a community of people that you trust and sort of, I imagine, is like concentric circles around your house and where you are. And we often say, find a tribe. Like our tribe might be the right tribe for you, but find a tribe or make a tribe, make a community. I know on our first night here around the campfire, we talked about the epidemic of loneliness and the report that came out from the Surgeon General recently and some of their recommendations. And a lot of it had to do with community. It's just interesting hearing you talk. My thought process immediately goes to, if I want my kid as a 3-year-old now, as a 6-year-old to be able to ride his bike, I, as the parent, need to invest in that community around my house. I need to prep that battle space for my 6-year-old to have the community that I trust, to have the group chat like you talked about, where you may not necessarily know which house your kid's at, but you can send up the bat signal and figure out, you have trusted families around the neighborhood that they're at one of their houses. And so I just think that's really interesting how those things interplay. But Casey, you mentioned being able to slowly give your kids more and more freedom. As a parent, we are often playing a parenting sport of two with two parents. So I was curious, was your wife on board with that free range parenting concept to begin with? And how did that conversation go? How did you navigate the conversations with your wife?
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, my wife was on board with the concept, but she was much slower to warm to it. Like I would have like pushed it faster, like larger, faster. Right. But the conversation about, getting to know the kids on the block and okay, like, yes, it's okay that they're over there. And I think the first time it was really just kind of an honest conversation of like, we did this, like, this is 2 houses down. This isn't like, we're not asking for anything crazy here. So let's open that door. And then as it expanded from there and there, then to be really honest, the first time the kids walked to school themselves, my wife was traveling, so she didn't know. I just kind of pulled the trigger on that one. She knows now, before this podcast, we've had that conversation, but she was like, yeah, I'm glad you did that when I wasn't home because it would have drove me crazy. But like, I think things like that, just every step along the way, after the first couple steps of proving, yes, we can trust them to go 2 doors down and make it home okay. Yes, we can leave them at the creek and walk home 10 minutes and they can make it home okay. Like seeing those little things made it easier to take the next step forward and the next step forward.
Yeah, I love that, dude. And as we're talking, there's also Stephen, something you said, and you guys have all mentioned it, but you're involved fathers, right? You guys are invested in your kids, and it requires effort. And there's something that I'm going to pass the mic to J Rob, because I use this all the time, and pardon the the reference or whatever, but he was talking about there was a meeting we were having in the Kinetic Man, and he was talking about a conversation he had with his boys. And his boys are getting to the age of, preteen, teen, like, and I won't use the exact language you use it because it's hilarious, but he basically was starting to engage in sex conversations and things of that nature. And the thing that struck me, besides the way that he framed it, and it was hilarious, um, the way he framed it was funny, but what really stuck with me is the patience with which he addressed this issue of potentially you know, his son becoming more self-aware. I'll frame it that way. And but very real issues, right? That most people are uncomfortable with, and most dads or moms, and I think it's a dad's role with a boy to go into this, because we understand intimately we were boys once. We're still, a lot of us are still boys at heart and in action. But the point is that he did not shy away from the conversation, and he framed it in a humorous way, but also, hey, let's talk about this. And so, J. Rob, I'm just curious. You don't have to expound on that example necessarily, but was it difficult, and how do you? I imagine that the investment in your children was significant. That so that when the time for this conversation came, it wasn't the first time you started engaging with your boys on these topics, right? Like, it wasn't like well, now I'm dad, I'm here, and I'm a trusted resource, I'm available. Like, how do you, with some of the guys that have younger kids, like, how do you start building those bridges of communication and love, but also patience and guidance at an early age?
Didn't we talk about not putting each other on the spot before we started this podcast? Okay. Oh, okay. We said it was okay. Okay, great. Yeah. So I will refrain from going into intricate detail on what that discussion was surrounding. But for anybody that's listening to the podcast and you want to get in touch with me, contact Goody, contact Stu, and I'm more than happy to make time to talk to you about some of these things as a preteen coming into adolescence, and the conversations that are starting to happen as physical development starts to happen. There's a couple things that come to mind as you kind of springboarded into this. One was, I was around other intentional men talking about this subject, and actually the subject related to pornography, back in 2016. And at that time, my son was 7 years old. So I was nowhere near the conversation with my son. And I listened to a guest speaker talk about how he normalizes the conversation with his son. Not in a way that I experienced. My dad will probably listen to this podcast. I love my dad. As Jones was talking about, we are products of our experience, right? And sometimes you resort to that, and sometimes that follows you for a bit. And for me, my experience was, okay, we're going to take a trip, son. You get 3 places to pick: the mountain, the beach, or the ocean. Or yeah, the beach and the ocean is pretty much the same. It was something else. Yeah, it was something else. Yeah. And so I think I chose to go to the beach, and we listened to the Dr. Dobson tapes on the way. And then he pulled out the whiteboard or the pencil and pad, and we went through the different body types and all that sort of stuff. And he was intentional about it, and I'm thankful for that. There's a lot of men that don't do that at the time. And my wife and I joke, it's like, oh man, here's the conversation, right? But I look back on that and I appreciate that. Then again, going back to 2016, I listened to a guy talk about how he, as a father, wanted to normalize that conversation with his sons. Then I fast forward into that, my son getting taller, stronger, faster, bigger all over. And I have to credit my wife, actually, because I started resorting to kind of, that was like one conversation I had with my dad. And my wife was pushing me to have that conversation, and I kept dragging my feet. I did. And fortunately, I started having those conversations. We just picked a book to go through. and take him out to ice cream, take him out to lunch, you know, try to bundle the conversation with something good, you know, so he doesn't totally hate it. And when certain events happen in a young man's life that he might not know is coming, I had those conversations about what was going to happen before it happened. And I was thankful that my wife pushed me. I was thankful for the conversation my dad had with me, thankful for the way that other men moved in my life to get me to that point. And it just happened again last week. Again, if you want to know more, contact Stu and Goody. But I was obedient ultimately to what I felt was the call of the father and call of a husband, especially with the wife leading me. So yeah, I was grateful for that.
Yeah, it's something that has come to my mind a couple times during this conversation, and I'm not sure if it actually answers a question that you all have asked. But going back to Jones talking about how we revert back to what our parents do and stuff, and then Goody kind of talking about like the conversations. And so, you know, I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. So my daughter's a little bit older. And as I came into my like parenting stage and being now a retired military officer, but, you know, I was in the military and stuff. And I was thinking like, I'm going to be a stern parent, a disciplinarian and stuff like that. Right. And similar, like my father was fairly stern at times, not necessarily a yeller, but stern and quiet disappointment, you know, type of disciplinary. But I realized very quickly with my daughter that she did not react well to that. She basically shut down. Right. And so it was kind of a learning thing for me at that time where I was a lot more effective to like get down on my knees and look at her in the eye and have a conversation at her level, you know, versus raising my voice and things like that. And that isn't to say, you know, in raising either of them, that I don't still raise my voice at times and to get their attention or whatnot. But I think with both of my children, they are more responsive to that conversation. And another twist I'll kind of throw in here too is my daughter's kind of a perfectionist in many ways, right? And sometimes she works slow at school because she wants things to be perfect. And in reality, I know that comes a lot from watching her parents, you know, so we can't be upset with her because I know that she has seen her mother and I do similar things. And so trying to like have that conversation with her and let her know like, hey, it's okay like to make mistakes. Like we all make mistakes. And, you know, the disciplinary type stuff, like having more of a conversation. And I think the part of the reason this is coming, you know, into my mind, this conversation is like when these things happen as they grow up in life and, you know, new stages, is for them to have that trust that they can come and talk to you, you know, versus it just being a reactionary discipline or yelling or something like that, to be like a trust point for them. And they know they can rely on you. So I don't know if that answers a question that you guys asked. It just like has come to my mind throughout this conversation.
Yeah. As I listen to you speak about your influence of your kid and how you handle different situations, one thing that came to mind after I talked was that I probably failed to, as Goody kind of prompted, was especially from a man raising a boy perspective, this whole idea of sexuality as being taboo. The thing that has been great is that it shouldn't be taboo at all, like whatsoever. And so to be humble enough to understand that how your son or your daughter are growing up, and you just get to meet them where they are, because that's part of the natural process, and that's where you get to meet them, and it kind of takes you back a little bit. And there's just nothing wrong when our sons or daughters start to pattern certain behaviors, or they're going through certain developments, and they're watching us all the time. It's a real privilege as a parent to reflect on that. And it's a real privilege as a parent to understand that this life that you've been given to shepherd is your responsibility to steward.
I'll pass it to you, David. I know you don't say something, but I was thinking the other night, I was like brushing my teeth, and my son, he's 5, he came into our bathroom, and he started to brush his teeth, and I was just brushing my teeth, and I look over, and he's literally like watching me brush my teeth and make every single like toothbrush move like in the same format as I'm doing. He's just watching and modeling, and that like really got me thinking, like, man, what am I doing just out of natural habit every single day that my kids are seeing me do? And it's just going to model, like they're just going to model whatever I do. Right. And it's just like, it really opened my eyes to like think about what I'm doing on a regular basis.
Well, I'm just shocked that Wells caught you the one time a week that you actually clean your mouth, which is fascinating to me. And I'm it's almost like a unicorn, but one of the things that a couple of you guys have said, and I just want to say it bluntly, that you alluded to, and you've said in a different way, but as a father, someone said this the other day, and it seems so simple, but it's a mindset thing. And if you have to tell yourself this 1,000 times, then you should tell yourself this 1,000 times. It is a privilege and a blessing to be a dad. And our kids should not be seen as burdens. We chose to have children, for most of us listening, I guess. But we chose to have children for a reason, right? And we should look at those children as a gift. And when you think about that, if you choose to consciously, when you look at your kids, to just say something to yourself like, what a gift. What a gift. I know you're being a giant a-hole, but what a gift. What a gift. It never happens. No. And when my kids listen, I'm talking about other people saying that about their children, not you guys. But not only recognizing that your children are a gift and you have the privilege to be a daddy, which is a coveted role. And there are people that can't be daddies that would give anything to be a daddy. But on top of that, the idea of knowing your children, right? So you have this gift. I want to invest my time to know you just as much as I invest my time to know my wife, my friends, these people around us. My kids are no different. They're not people to be ruled. They're these unique individuals. And the interesting thing that happens is as you get to know them, fascinating things become clear about them and the people that God blessed them to be, right? That they have these gifts. Some of them are unique. My kids have unique gifts they're all athletes. They get that from my wife. Like that's not something that I experienced, and I had to try really, really hard. Although I just want to highlight Jones and I, TKM retreat champions. Yeah, basically won everything. We're undefeated when it counted. We were undefeated and are champions in the TKM Olympics. But anyways, that's beside the point. But what I'm trying to say is not only is it a privilege, not only should we recognize the gift that these children are, because I promise you, if they were taken away, you don't want that to be the moment you realize how special they were. And as and at some point they may not be taken away, but they're going to go, and you realize how many opportunities you had to say, I love you, to cherish them, to get to know them. And you want to know them before they're gone, right? Before they leave the house. And so what you guys are talking about is knowing your kids and knowing how to talk to them, and knowing that just like I don't have a relationship with you, Marcus, the same with Stu. Well, Jacob and Maya and Noah are very different people. And so I should not expect to just be the same, amazing father to all of them, because that's not necessarily the case. Right. And so it's just a special place to come from.
So one of the things that we've started doing and challenging the other men in this tribe to do is we had Jim Shields on. He wrote a book called The Family Board Meeting, and he talks about taking your kids on dates, and he set it up every quarter, and allow the kid to pick a location, to pick a fun event to go do. And the rules are, you put the phones away. The only reason you have a phone out is to take a picture so you can create the memory, and you go do something fun together, and you end it with a meal. And in that meal, you have intentional, deep conversations. And what I'm finding is, starting at age 7 and 4 when we started this, now 8 and 5, the conversations are very simple at that age. But what I'm already starting to see is that there is trust building, there's relationship building, there are conversations at an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old level that are happening, that I know will progress as they get older to the 13, the 14, the 15, the 18 level. And I'm really excited about that process, starting now at that young age. I'm curious. I know some of you guys are doing the same thing. I'm curious, just if you guys have any like super cool experiences in that.
Well, the first thing I want to admit to is that I'm a work in progress as a father, and I don't always get this right. Probably I get it wrong more than I get it right. So I do want to encourage anybody that's listening, and of course all the guys here too, is that we're just committed to it. We're just committed to meeting our kids where they are. And so whether it's a question about fear and being able to play outside, and what kind of kid our kid is, whether it's our oldest or youngest, like, we're going to figure that out. One of the things that continues to pay dividends in terms of how I was able to spend time with my oldest son was, we went on a mission trip in Mexico when he was 9. And that experience, no phones for a week, serving together, seeing poverty on every block in the worst way, but at the same time seeing hope, and just binding those things together, it really forged our relationship in a way that I didn't anticipate. And even the lead pastor at our church, Ocean View Church, would comment to me, and continues to comment to me. It was really cool for him to see the conversations I was having with my 9-year-old son on that Monday, and how it changed from that Monday to the Friday. So that was something cool that we were able to do as a father and a son.
So I hate to beat a dead horse here, because I think you all have heard me say this, but I just want to give a little background context. That been in education for a long time, worked with a lot of parents, a lot of families over 20 plus years, so thousands of kids. And something that I'm still learning, and I have to stop myself, is that I don't think I've ever met a bad parent. I think I've met parents that I looked at that are raising children different than the way I was raised, or different than the way that I'm raising my children. And I automatically started to judge them and assume that they're bad parents. And now, after having kids, I got 3 little ones, and looking back, every parent that I could say that I talked to is doing the best that they can do. And some situations are different for different people. And so they're doing the best that they can do, whether they're a single parent working multiple jobs and they can only be around for a little bit, like, that's the best that they can do. And when I start to walk into a situation assuming that that parent is doing the best that they can do, we connect on a very different level, and we find solutions for their kids. When I walk into a situation with an adult or a parent where I'm judging them and saying, like, you haven't done a good job as a parent, and that's why your kid is acting this way, it's very different. It's easy to take an education lens and do that, because I talk to parents all of the time. I wonder what it would look like to start to look at one another like that. Like, I trust that you're doing the best that you can do. And you might be struggling with your kids. I struggle with my kids all the time. My wife is a saint. My wife is a saint of a woman. I don't know how she does what she does. I struggle with my kids all the time. And she looks at me like, you're doing the best that you can do. And when we start to look at each other like that, I think you get higher levels of support, as opposed to closed doors on questions or support that you might need with your own children. And in a society where there's competition, there's right and wrong, there's judgment, there's everything, it's really hard just to look at somebody and say, I trust that you're doing the best you can do with your kids, because it's a lot easier to say all the things they've done wrong and what you would do differently. But you are not in their shoes. You're not in their financial situation. You are not in their transportation situation. So you have no idea, right? So I'm always curious about, how do we get to a place where we can assume the best of one another instead of quickly go to what our brains tell us to do, is to judge one another on how we parent our own children, which also brings in fears and safety and questionable communities and what I'm okay with my kids doing and not doing. But if we were to take the 30,000-foot view, it's different. And the news doesn't help any, media doesn't help any. We get pummeled with like what happens to kids when we try to take the best of assumptions, and we can't take those one-off media things as like that's what the whole world is and that's what every parent is, because then we're going to shelter our children to the point where they're not going to be adults. They're going to need a continuous amount of support that we can't give by the time they're 35, 40 years old. But it's a unique perspective because I deal with parents all the time and I happen to be one, and I'm still learning a lot about all those things. So I'd be curious about like what that looks like to other people around assuming the best and versus judging somebody about the way they might parent their own children.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times that comes with the wisdom of time. When you make all the mistakes, when you're a young parent, or at least for myself, I thought I had it figured out, and all these other irresponsible parents had a lot to learn. But I give grace now that I'm a grandfather and still struggling, still making mistakes. This journey is challenging. I was just on the phone with my son, who left the jacuzzi on all night, and it just gave me something that we just keep doing. Yeah, so it is a fine balance of knowing you're not giving yourself grace, and as you said, giving others grace. I think it also starts with, going back to what we said, we sort of are product of our upbringing. And it starts with saying, what you said, J. Rob, I love my dad. We've had intimate conversations about this, right? You love them for what they did with what they had. And then take those lessons, good and bad, and apply them to your own life, right? Because I am a very different dad than my dad was, right? My dad was a very, a disciplinarian. He was killed when I was 11. So I didn't have the example of parenting with mom playing dad and mom. She did the best she could. And a lot of the examples was like the bad Latino machismo, sexist examples that I had around me. So it was, live and learn, giving yourself grace, and pausing and not be, I still do it, but reactionary. It's never going, whether you're in a leadership position in an organization or you're leading at home, not doing anything in passion and anger, pausing, maybe reaching out to one of these fellows that, I've shared that example of another challenge that I had not too long ago with the other one. And I reached out and reaching out to your tribe for that collective intelligence, all the parents here enabled me to make the best choice that I could make, right? Because I tapped in to all of that wisdom, and I tell you, I don't know, the future will tell if that worked out, but I felt much better about round 2 than round 1 when I didn't reach out to you guys. So Yeah, my 2 cents there.
And I just want to highlight that was the one and only Dave Perez, a special late entry guest. But as Dave's motto is, if not late, then never, right? Is it which I think was a family motto, and absolutely love Dave Perez.
Well, I just loved what he said, because this podcast started with a question about how we raise our kids, and kids, talking about fear and things like that. And I think DP, one and only Dave Perez, was the first one to mention that how important it is to seek the counsel of other parents and other people that you trust, and before being reactionary. So in that moment when your kid wants to go play outside, and maybe the conversation's only been between you and your wife, I mean, who else have you reached out to? So I thought that was a solid point.
Just real fast, Michael, I know you want to say something, but we have a new member of TKM, and he joined us for this. He's not in this session, but one thing that he said was, "Hey, I'm finding that as soon as I decide to open up a little bit and just talk about like my feelings and my thoughts and what's going on, is I'm not the only one." And I think the first choice you have to make is allowing yourself to be vulnerable and be in that space to then open up. And you'll find very quickly that other men, other dads are going through the same thing, have gone through that same thing, and are there to open and open hands and like open up and like help, like if you're going through something. So
yeah, so what Brandon said a little bit earlier just really resonated with me, right? One of the goals of being in TKM is obviously being a better husband, father, and friend, right? And so really over the last couple of years of being in TKM, I've become a better husband and father because, frankly, I never had that conversation with my wife of like, you're doing the best that you can, right? Like for me, it was, hey, you're the primary parent, because I'm the primary breadwinner for the family. We never had that conversation of like, this is actually a team effort, right? So I was always like, we've had ups and downs with our kids. They're 11 and 13. Everybody has ups and downs with their kids. But when we had the downs, I played the blame game, right? Like it was like, hey, you're with them majority of the time. Like our kids are a direct reflection of you, and it's your fault that we're having the downs. And that was absolutely the wrong tact and approach to take, right? So now it's definitely having, like, what DP said, having that grace. She's doing the best that she can. None of us are perfect, right? We're all trying to be the best parents that we can be. But frankly, yeah, have that deliberate, intentional conversation of like, sure, we may think these are our roles within the parenting team, but like, outline those duties and responsibilities as far as like, okay, maybe we need to have that preteen, teenager sex talk or whatever. Let's talk about what kind of freedom our kids have around money or being able to leave the neighborhood, right? Like our son has just recently started like taking his bike with neighbors and buddies to the store to go to like Buffalo Wild Wings or like Chipotle. It's probably about a mile away, not too far from our house. But he'll go there with neighbor boys that are a year or two older than him. And they spend their own money that they've earned from like a lemonade stand, or like they get birthday money from, grandparents or whoever else. And I don't know if you guys have ever used that card, Greenlight. Greenlight. Yeah. So we've been doing that. And so, we certainly monitor Greenlight, but it's kind of up to their discretion. Okay, hey, I want to eat out 5 days in a row for lunch during the summertime. Well, if you want to have money next week to be able to spend on other things, you're going to have to earn that by doing stuff around the house, chores, whatever else, right? So I guess I would say that one, thanks, Brandon, for saying that, because I think it needed to be said. Everyone's trying to do the best that they can, and we need to acknowledge that as parents, as men, trying to be better husbands and fathers.
Yeah, I love that, dude. That's super solid. And you know, just to follow on for that, I think there's two things that have really changed my life. One is 100% ownership, right? So as a father, I have an obligation that's 100% in my lane, that I have the privilege to be a model and to do the things and to mess up and extend grace and to receive grace. But it's 100% my responsibility to be the dad and to fulfill a role, right? And that role varies from kid to kid, from day to day, but my consistent effort to 100% own my responsibility as a dad and to be there for my kids and to be there for my wife as a husband, that's on me. And then the other part that has been transformative, and we talk about that in the TCAM all the time. Like, you're responsible, be honest with yourself, right? Like, as a dad, if you're not participating in your kids' sports, well, just be honest and just assess what you're doing during that time, and just label it as such, right? Label your priorities and make your calendar reflect, and then you have no excuses. Stop making excuses. But then there's also this idea of comparing that you mentioned, Jones. When I stopped, when I took full ownership, I also recognized that other people's kids they're not my kids. There's no amount of capacity or energy I should put into considering somebody else's parenting style when it's not my kids. They are not me. I don't know their full situation. And when you finally get to the point where you're like, I tell my kids this all the time. There's a super rich neighborhood, and my kids are like, oh, their house is so nice and the cars are nice. I'm like, that's awesome. That's great. Do you know what kind of debt they might be in for that? My kid's like, what are you even talking about? I'm like, well, you don't know the full situation. You don't know somebody else's situation. You don't know their pain. You don't know their joys. You know nothing about them. And quite frankly, it's inconsequential to your life. How does it impact your day to day? It doesn't. Okay. So what are the things that we do own? What is our ownership? Not own like material, but what are the things that we own from an ownership perspective and are responsible for? And then who cares about the other? Like, why compare? It's a waste of time. And once I kind of, just spent a lot of time in that, it also changed my relationship with my kids, because there's no longer there's our family, the Gutierrez way. And it's the way that we want to be in our household. And it really doesn't matter outside who speaks into it. There's a very limited amount of people. And when they speak into it, it's because they've been invited to speak into it, not because I care about their opinion. And you can also, that's very freeing. It's very freeing to be like, hey, I don't know if and I love my mom dearly, but I've had this conversation with, like, Mom, I didn't really ask your opinion on how we should do this thing. You had an opportunity with me and Adam. You messed it up with my brother. You did really good with me. Like, now that chance is over. Now it's on us. So I love that, the idea of just, the grace, but also the lack of comparison. Who cares how Stu raises his kids is very much inconsequential to how I raise my kids. Right. And there should be no thought process that necessarily goes into that, outside of me feeling sorry for his kids that he's their dad. But besides that, I think that I'm just kidding. Your kids are super blessed. You're about to say you feel sorry for your kids because, I got you. That's very self-aware of you, Stuart. I appreciate that. No, that's good, man. I think there's some insights here, and I also I want to emphasize, when you listen to this, when you listen to these dads, there's some big takeaways. There's some very practical things that you could apply to your own life. There's no kidding tactical steps that you could take, decisions you could make. And there's conversations you can have with your wife. There's conversations you can have with your kids, boys, girls. There's things that you can model. There's intentional decisions you can make in the way that you choose to conduct yourself, and not to be reactionary. Like Dave said, there's so many nuggets of wisdom. And I would also encourage you, it doesn't have to be the Kinetic Man. I mean, you will not find a group of better men, I fully believe, in the world than you will find in the Kinetic Man. But what I would say is, find that tribe, find those people, find those men that you can pick up the phone and be like, look, dude, I'm having a really hard day. I suck as a dad. My kids hate me. My wife does too. have you ever experienced this? And if you call Stu, he's gonna be like, yes, every day. Is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday? What is it? No, but all joking aside, there's also a huge amount of comfort in your ability to pick up the phone and to know that somebody on the other side has experienced it. There's no judgment. In this group, there's no kidding. There's love on the other side of that line, and there's going to be listening. And then there can also be very real conversations of, I've experienced this, and this is what I did about it. And this may work, this may not work, but no matter what happens, I'm here to support you. I'm here to listen. I love you. And I'm happy to have this conversation at any time that you want to pick up the phone and have it with me. And that's a pretty powerful, special thing to do.
One thing that came to mind is I'm learning to apologize a lot, both to my wife and to my kids. And getting down on the floor and being at eye level, Marcus, like you talked about, and DP, like having grace, giving yourself grace, and actually apologizing to a 5-year-old has been really life-giving to me. And then what I'm finding is it's now modeling to them, like, that it's okay to make mistakes, and then it's okay to also apologize. So we've hit a lot of topics today on parenting, on being a dad. I don't know if we answered the original question.
I don't remember what it was.
But I don't know. I really enjoyed this conversation. You guys have any other thoughts before we close out? Steven?
Yeah, I think that what I am taking away from the conversation is that an intentional parent is a prepared parent. Whether it's building community around you and being the nucleus, right? And it's fine. We say go find a tribe, but it may be you have to make a tribe, right? It's like whether you got to find a tribe or make a tribe. And then J-Rob, what you were talking about, made me think, like, there are some conversations that my dad had with me that I think were great examples. There are some other conversations that I want to do differently, and I know they're coming at me. It's a ticking clock. Every parent is going to have to face these conversations, right? It's like when I help people with personal finance and I say, was Christmas a surprise this year? Like, we weren't sure that one was coming as an expense. And so I know that as a 6-year-old, my kid is going to want to ride his bike down to the creek. So what do I do today? I have to do something today. There's going to be a sex talk that comes with every kid. There should be, right? And so, like, I need to be prepared. I need to go seek out resources and examples if I want to do something different than what was modeled for me. I have to see those examples. So that's like the action step that I'm taking away today, that I need to write a list out. We've talked about this in TCAM before. Like, there's one of our members wrote a list of like 20 items he wants to teach his kid before they turn 18, and he's got it in his nightstand next to his table, right? I think there's an element of that here. There's some conversations and some actions that I think I need to write down, have those conversations with my wife, and like be prepared as a team before we get to those points of having to cross that bridge. But that's what I'm taking away.
Love it, dude. Men, thanks for showing up. Thanks for having this conversation. Thanks for coming to this retreat. I love every single one of these. I love the planned stuff. I love the unplanned stuff. I love the side conversations. I don't like losing to David.
But that's a lifelong, like, you should be accustomed.
No.
At this point.
No. I'm excited about the rest of our retreat. Yeah. Anything else, David? Do you want to brag again about winning the Olympics today?
No, look, I believe in the high road. I believe in humility. I believe that winners know they're winners and the rest know they're winners too, so they don't need to really talk much about it. So I don't want to spend any more time talking about Jones's and my victory, regardless of how dominant it was.
Humility.
Humility is a humility. I mean, I feel oftentimes I'm the most humble person that I know, and that's not a brag. That's not a brag at all. And so, I just think it's it's a special place to be in a winner's circle. All joking aside, hey, men and women listeners too, find a tribe, find those resources. I tell you, my life is so rich and is so fulfilled because of when I just look around this circle and just see these men, the love that I feel, the acceptance I feel. You're right. When I look around this rectangle table, we're back to that geometry. It should be heart-shaped for the way that I feel. It should be a heart-shaped table with a lot of happy emojis because my heart is full, and that doesn't come by being by myself. It doesn't come by going onto Facebook or LinkedIn and getting likes. It comes through real human interactions. It comes through hugs. It comes through hand holding. It comes through these things that are very special. The things that we do in this group that are just unique. And no kidding, when we hit stop record, I'm going to ask J-Rob about how you have some of these conversations with, how do you prepare to have the conversations with daughters, right? And talk through, as a dad, how do you have these conversations, not just with your boys, because that's comfortable, but with your girls, right? And so there's just so many things that are beautiful. Go find a tribe. If this tribe is the tribe that you want to be a part of, hit us up. Hit up any of these dudes and ask them about it if you don't trust Stu. Or you can hit me up directly. And I just want to emphasize, life together is vastly, vastly more rich. Also, we have a retreat coming up in May. So if this is something you want to do, or we've not invited you to be on our podcast, because this is, right after Joe Rogan, like that's kind of where we're ranking right now. But if you want to potentially have a shot at being on the podcast, we'll do this again in May. And you can also sign up for our newsletter at thekineticman.com/newsletter. That is thekineticman.com/newsletter. Yeah, it's going to be good. All right, men, thank you guys. You're amazing. You're beautiful for the most part. And appreciate your wisdom and you guys sitting with us today. Love you, dudes. See ya.
Man, we have exciting news. We're opening up the next house of the Kinetic Man Mastermind. I tell you, it's the most important hour of the week that I go to, that I attend. I change every single week for the better to become the best husband, the best father, the best friend, and the best leader in our community. This is a time that you can choose to make a major impact in your life. Go to thekineticman.com and sign up. It's an application. It is exclusive. We are looking for the right man to take action and join us to be the hero of their journey. Come join us, thekineticman.com. Do it.
Thank you for listening to the Kinetic Man podcast. If you are growth-minded, community-focused, and willing to take uncommon action to redefine success and live an abundant life, visit our website at www.thekineticman.com to see all the ways we could connect.
And on our website, you can find more information on everything we're doing, like joining our Meetup page to get the details on our webinars and our local Thursday gatherings here in Colorado. From our site, you can also find more information on and sign up for the next Kinetic Man Retreat and the next house of our mastermind group. Finally, we always appreciate your love and support. Please share this episode and go rate us on your favorite podcast player of choice.
Thank you again. Now go take uncommon action.